Michael Jordan quietly pays a visit to the hospital where his mom gave birth to him. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Michael Jordan's rise to greatness is woven into the very fabric of basketball history, a journey punctuated by ambition, unmatched talent, and a fierce drive for success. But before all the championships, accolades, and records, before the Air Jordans and global fame, Michael's journey began in the most humble of places, a small, nearly forgotten hospital wing in Brooklyn, New York. It was here, on February 17, 1963, that Michael Jeffrey Jordan entered the world, the first of his mother's children, destined to become one of the most iconic figures the world has ever seen. At the time, the hospital that brought Michael into the world was no stranger to hardship. The building, though functional, had seen better days. Located in the heart of a working-class Brooklyn neighborhood, it was one of many community institutions struggling to maintain its relevance in an era where medical technology and facilities were rapidly advancing. Yet for Michael, it represented something more, something that would quietly shape his character for years to come. Michael's mother, Dolores Jordan, had grown up in a modest environment, and even before Michael was born, she had learned to make do with what little she had. She never had any illusions about life being easy, but she was determined to provide her children with the best opportunities possible. It was a mindset she instilled in Michael from a very young age, and it would serve as the foundation for everything he would achieve in life. Dolores often spoke about her experiences with the hospital where Michael was born, describing it as a place that, while not luxurious, had a soul. It was where she had given birth to her son, and that meant everything to her. As the years passed, the hospital, like many others, began to fade into obscurity. The area around it was undergoing rapid change, with new developments springing up in the heart of Brooklyn. Yet, despite the encroaching gentrification and rising costs, the hospital's legacy remained intact, especially in the memories of those who had once relied on its services. It was a reminder of the community's past, of a time when small institutions held families together in their most vulnerable moments. In the early years of Michael's career, he was unaware of how much the hospital would come to play a role in his life once again. His focus was on basketball, first at Laney High School, then the University of North Carolina, and eventually the Chicago Bulls. The spotlight on his achievements quickly became blinding, with Michael's name becoming synonymous with greatness. The world watched as he soared on the court, setting new records and winning championships, seemingly unstoppable. But through it all, Michael never lost sight of where he came from. His family, especially his mother, remained central to his life, and the values she instilled in him continued to guide him. Years later, as Michael became a global icon, the hospital that had seen him take his first breath was falling into further disrepair. Its future seemed bleak. It was a microcosm of the challenges facing many smaller, community-driven institutions. Medical costs were soaring, and facilities like this one were becoming harder and harder to maintain. In a world that valued the shiny, the new, the next big thing, the hospital had become an afterthought, forgotten by most, but not by those whose lives had been touched there. It wasn't until decades later that Michael Jordan, in a moment that would surprise many, would find his way back to the place where it all began. His journey to the hospital wasn't publicized. There were no cameras, no journalists waiting for a soundbite. It wasn't a grand gesture meant for the world to see. It was something much more personal. On a quiet evening, Michael visited the very hospital where he had been born, walking through its faded hallways and old, creaky floors, a place so far removed from the glamour of his later years. Staff members who had worked at the hospital for years had no idea who he was at first. They were used to seeing visitors, sometimes local celebrities or big donors, but Michael Jordan wasn't the kind of person who announced himself. He slipped in quietly, not as the international superstar, but as a man reconnecting with the place that played an undeniable role in his early life. He took a brief tour of the hospital, meeting with nurses and doctors who had worked there long before the building was on the verge of closure. For those few moments, it was as though time had stood still. Michael was no longer the man who had just led the Chicago Bulls to another championship. He was simply Michael, the boy who had once been born into this very space. The visit was low-key, with no fanfare or media attention. Michael's presence went largely unnoticed, though a few staff members realized who he was when he spoke about his memories of Brooklyn. He didn't speak of fame or basketball. He spoke about his mother, how much she had meant to him, and how she had always talked about the hospital with such fondness. To him, it was a place that had played a role in shaping who he had become. The visit wasn't about nostalgia, it was about honoring the legacy of that space, a legacy that had given him life, quite literally. In the weeks that followed, no one outside of the hospital staff knew what had happened that evening. But then, an announcement came that stunned the entire city. A multi-million-dollar donation had been made to the hospital, enough to fund a complete renovation of the building and ensure its survival. There were no names attached to the gift, no acknowledgement of the donor's identity, but the timing was undeniable. The community rejoiced. The hospital would not be closing after all. It would be reborn, revitalized, and ready to serve generations to come. But Michael, as always, remained in the shadows, not seeking praise or recognition for his actions. The news spread quickly, but even as the story hit the headlines, few could have imagined that the man responsible for the donation was none other than Michael Jordan himself. He had quietly chosen to give back to the community that had given him life, not for the recognition, but because he understood something that few others did. The importance of legacy wasn't just about what you could take from the world, but what you could leave behind. And in that quiet act of philanthropy, Michael Jordan had given far more than just money. He had given hope. Michael Jordan's return to the hospital in Brooklyn wasn't something that could be easily explained. In the years that followed, it would become a pivotal moment in the larger narrative of his life, a gesture that seemed almost out of character for someone as public and grandiose as Michael Jordan. But that's what made it all the more significant. It wasn't about being seen or celebrated. It was about honoring something that had shaped him, even if he'd never truly realized it at the time. For Michael, basketball had always been more than just a game. It was an avenue for him to prove himself, to overcome the doubts that others had about his talent, and to create a legacy that would stand the test of time. But beneath the surface, there was always a quiet humility that few people outside his closest circle ever saw. His rise to fame wasn't about seeking the limelight, it was about transcending his circumstances and pushing himself to places even he didn't know he could go. In that sense, his visit to the hospital in Brooklyn made perfect sense. It wasn't about charity. It wasn't about making headlines. It was a return to his roots, to the place that had started it all, and to a community that had given him his first breath. The journey from Brooklyn to the NBA was long, full of setbacks, personal growth, and countless hours of work. Michael's story began in a time when the NBA was far from the global spectacle it is today. The league was struggling to find its identity, and players like Michael were tasked not just with excelling on the court but with building the league into what it would eventually become. For Michael, every game was more than just a contest of skills, it was a chance to prove his worth, to show the world that he belonged among the elite. As a child, Michael had always been driven, though in the early years, he wasn't the tallest or the strongest player on the court. He was overlooked by many, even his own coaches, who sometimes doubted his abilities. But Michael had something that couldn't be measured in stats or physical prowess, a relentless work ethic and a chip on his shoulder that made him refuse to back down from any challenge. His mother, Dolores, had always told him that the world wouldn't give him anything, he'd have to take it. That lesson stuck with him through every game, every practice, and every obstacle he faced. The hospital in Brooklyn wasn't just a physical location, it symbolized that early struggle, the hardship that every person, every family, has to overcome. By the time Michael reached the NBA, he had already been tested in ways most people could never understand. His early years with the Chicago Bulls were marked by both triumphs and frustrations. He was a singular talent, a player who could dominate in ways that no one had ever seen before, but the Bulls were not yet the juggernaut they would eventually become. They struggled to make a real impact in the league, and for a time, it seemed that Michael's individual greatness might not be enough to carry them to the top. But that hunger, that drive to succeed, never left him. His work ethic was legendary, his commitment to excellence unmatched. Behind the flashy dunks, the jaw-dropping shots, and the fierce competition, there was an unrelenting pursuit of greatness. Michael wasn't content with just being good, he wanted to be the best, and he was willing to do whatever it took to achieve that goal. He pushed himself and his teammates to levels they never thought possible. He demanded perfection, not just from himself but from everyone around him. The turning point in Michael's career came in the mid-1980s when the Bulls started to put the pieces together. The addition of key players like Scottie Pippen and Horace Grant made the team more formidable, and slowly, Michael began to realize that he didn't have to do it all himself. He had teammates who could rise to the occasion, who could help him shoulder the burden of greatness. As the Bulls became a force in the league, Michael began to transform from a young phenom into a seasoned leader, a player who could elevate his team and take them to heights they'd never dreamed of. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was mental. Michael learned to trust his teammates, to believe in their abilities, and to push them to reach their potential. But the most important lesson of all was that true greatness wasn't about individual glory. It was about creating something that would last, something that would endure long after the players had retired, long after the trophies had been won. It was about leaving behind a legacy that would be remembered for generations. Michael Jordan understood that, even as the world marveled at his individual accomplishments. His success on the court was unmatched, but it was also clear that his impact would extend far beyond the hardwood. The success of the Chicago Bulls in the 1990s, with 6 championships in 8 years, marked the beginning of Michael Jordan's ascension into a global icon. But even as he became a household name, his roots in Brooklyn remained firmly planted. The neighborhood where he was born, the hospital that had once served as his entry into the world, would always be a part of his story. By the time Michael Jordan reached the peak of his career, the hospital in Brooklyn had fallen into disrepair. Its days seemed numbered, its walls crumbling, its future uncertain. Yet for Michael, there was never any doubt about what the place meant to him. In the midst of his fame and fortune, he never forgot where he came from. He knew that the hospital, while no longer at its prime, had played a significant role in shaping his early life. It had been there when his family needed it most, and he had a debt to repay, a debt that could never truly be quantified. Years passed, and Michael continued to carve out his legacy both on and off the court. He had retired, come back, and led the Bulls to even more championships, cementing his place in history as one of the greatest athletes the world had ever seen. Yet, despite all of his success, there was something in him that always longed for the simple things, the values he had learned from his family, the lessons about hard work, humility, and perseverance that had been instilled in him from a young age. Those lessons, he knew, were at the heart of everything he had achieved. It was during this period of reflection, when he had already secured his place as a legend of the game, that Michael quietly returned to the hospital. The visit wasn't about the fanfare or recognition, it was about something much deeper. Michael was reconnecting with a piece of his past, a piece that had helped shape who he was. The hospital, a symbol of where it all began, had fallen on hard times, and Michael knew that he could do something about it. His desire to give back, to ensure that others could have the same opportunities he had, led him to make an extraordinary decision. The visit to the hospital was only the beginning. A few months later, the community would be stunned to learn that Michael Jordan was the anonymous donor behind a multi-million-dollar donation that would save the hospital from closure. The renovation was nothing short of miraculous. The hospital, once on the brink of being forgotten, was now poised for a new beginning. It was a gesture that reflected the essence of who Michael Jordan had become, not just a basketball legend, but a man who understood the importance of giving back. The impact of Michael Jordan's quiet generosity reverberated across Brooklyn in ways no one could have predicted. For years, the hospital had been an anchor for the community, serving as a lifeline for those in need, especially for families who couldn't afford the rising costs of healthcare. But as the years wore on and the financial strain on the facility grew, it had become increasingly clear that the hospital's days were numbered. People in the neighborhood had begun to whisper about the possibility of its closure, and local politicians scrambled to find a solution. It seemed like there was little hope left. And then, out of nowhere, came the unexpected lifeline that no one could have anticipated, the anonymous donation that would keep the hospital afloat. News of the multi-million-dollar donation spread like wildfire, leaving the entire community in a state of shock and gratitude. The hospital, which had been on the brink of closure, now had a chance at survival, thanks to the mysterious benefactor whose name remained unknown. As the renovation process began, the hospital's leadership was determined to make the most of the windfall. The resources were there to overhaul the outdated building, modernizing its facilities, and bringing it up to the standards needed to serve the growing community. The work was substantial: new equipment, state-of-the-art treatment rooms, and expanded services that would ensure the hospital could meet the demands of the 21st century. But it wasn't just about the physical space. The renovation was a statement to the people of Brooklyn that their community mattered, that they deserved the same level of care as anyone in the city. It was about restoring a piece of history, a legacy that had been nearly forgotten. While the renovation was underway, those closest to Michael began to hear whispers about his involvement. At first, it was nothing more than speculation. People speculated about who could have made such a monumental gift. Some pointed to local philanthropists, others to wealthy businesspeople who had ties to the area. But as the weeks passed and the work continued, the truth slowly began to surface. Michael Jordan, the man who had transcended basketball and become a global icon, was the person behind the donation. But even as the news leaked, Michael remained steadfast in his decision to keep his involvement private. There would be no press conference, no public acknowledgement. This wasn't about him, it was about the people of Brooklyn, the community that had given him so much in his early life. To Michael, the decision to fund the renovation of the hospital was about more than just writing a check. It was about honoring the place where it all began. When he had visited the hospital months earlier, he had been struck by how much it had changed, or, more accurately, how much it hadn't changed. The building, despite its age and disrepair, still held a sense of purpose, a sense of pride that Michael could feel in his bones. It was a place where families had experienced the highs and lows of life. It was a place of healing and hope, and it had played an undeniable role in his own story. Michael's decision wasn't born out of a desire for recognition or praise. It was a simple, straightforward act of giving back. He understood that success was not just about what you achieved for yourself, it was about how you used your platform to make a difference in the lives of others. He had seen the power of community and the impact that one individual could have on the lives of so many. And in that moment, he decided that he would be the one to provide the support needed to give the hospital a second chance. In the months following the announcement of the donation, the community began to see changes. The hospital was slowly transformed into a state-of-the-art facility that could meet the needs of its patients in ways it never had before. The medical staff, many of whom had worked there for decades, were thrilled with the new equipment and resources at their disposal. They had always believed in the hospital's mission, but now, with the renovation underway, they felt reinvigorated, empowered to continue providing the best care possible. The local residents, who had once feared the loss of their beloved hospital, were now filled with a sense of pride. They had witnessed firsthand the power of someone using their success to give back to the community. Michael Jordan's gift had reminded them that there were still people in the world who cared about them, who understood the importance of investing in the well-being of others. For many of them, it was a moment of hope in an otherwise uncertain world. But while the renovation was making a tangible difference in the lives of the people of Brooklyn, the true depth of Michael's contribution became clear when the hospital reopened its doors. The grand reopening wasn't marked by a large ceremony or fanfare. It was a quiet, understated event, much like the man who had made it possible. Michael wasn't there to bask in the spotlight. He wasn't looking for applause or recognition. His legacy, he knew, was already secured in the hearts of those he had touched throughout his career. This act of giving wasn't about adding to that legacy, it was about ensuring that others could continue to build their own. When the hospital finally reopened, it was a shining example of what could happen when a community rallied together. The work that had been done to transform the building was more than just cosmetic, it was a statement of purpose. The hospital now had the tools it needed to continue serving the people of Brooklyn for years to come. And that was Michael's true gift, not just the money, but the hope that came with it. He had given the community a future, a chance to build upon its history and carry forward its legacy. As the months passed, people began to realize that Michael's impact went beyond the hospital itself. His donation had sparked a renewed sense of community pride, and it had shown the residents of Brooklyn that they were valued. In a world where people often feel overlooked and forgotten, Michael had given them something tangible to hold on to. He had reminded them that they mattered, that their stories and their struggles were important. For Michael, the act of giving back wasn't a one-off event. It was a reminder of the importance of staying grounded, of remembering where you came from, no matter how high you climbed. He had achieved everything a person could dream of in his career, but he never lost sight of the values that had been instilled in him by his family. The hospital was just one example of the many ways he quietly gave back to those in need, using his influence and wealth to make the world a better place, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. The story of Michael Jordan's involvement with the Brooklyn Hospital is not one of grand gestures or public displays of generosity. It's a story of quiet action, of someone who understood that sometimes the most meaningful contributions are the ones made without any expectation of return. Michael had already built a legacy in the world of basketball, but this was a different kind of legacy. It was a legacy of giving, of using one's success to make a real and lasting difference in the lives of others. And in the end, that is what truly defines greatness. As the renovation of the hospital in Brooklyn progressed, the community began to change in ways no one had anticipated. The once near-forgotten institution, now breathing new life, became a symbol of resilience and hope. People in the neighborhood, who had for years worried about their futures and the stability of their local resources, started to feel a renewed sense of pride. The hospital was no longer just a place for emergency visits or routine care. It was a cornerstone of the community's survival, and its revival was a beacon of possibility. For the hospital staff, the transformation was both a challenge and an opportunity. Many had spent decades working in the outdated building, making do with what little they had. But with the arrival of state-of-the-art equipment, renovated treatment rooms, and expanded services, the morale of the entire medical staff skyrocketed. Doctors, nurses, and administrators found themselves reinvigorated, excited to work with new resources that allowed them to care for their patients in ways they never could before. For some, the hospital's revival was a literal and figurative lifeline, giving them a reason to stay, a reason to invest even more of themselves into the work they had done for years. This newfound energy wasn't just felt by the staff. The community surrounding the hospital took note. Local residents, who had been uncertain about the future of their neighborhood, felt an unexpected shift. The hospital's renovation acted as a catalyst, sparking conversations about the future of Brooklyn itself. In a world where gentrification had often pushed out longtime residents, the hospital's revival was a sign that the area still held potential. It was a sign that the people who had lived there for generations mattered, that their lives and well-being were worth investing in. In the months following the announcement of the hospital's renovation, Michael Jordan's name slowly became more closely linked to the story. At first, the donation had been shrouded in mystery. Local news outlets covered the renovation, but the donor remained unnamed. It was a deliberate decision by Michael, who had made it clear that he didn't want to be in the spotlight. As more details emerged, however, the connection became undeniable. Michael Jordan, the basketball legend who had taken the world by storm, was the benefactor behind the transformation of the hospital. While the revelation surprised many, it didn't change the nature of Michael's gesture. He had made the donation for one reason: to give back to the place that had played a significant role in his life. The hospital, though not a glamorous location in the world of high-profile donations, was where he had taken his first breath, and for Michael, that was enough to inspire him to act. It wasn't about creating a public relations campaign or putting his name on a plaque. It was about honoring the community that had shaped him, that had nurtured him before the world knew his name. Michael's decision to remain out of the public eye reflected the nature of his character. Despite his fame, he never lost sight of the things that truly mattered: family, loyalty, and humility. While many athletes of his stature might have used such a donation to seek recognition or bask in the glory of their charitable acts, Michael quietly went about making a real difference without any desire for fanfare. His approach to philanthropy was not about personal gain or accolades; it was about giving to those who needed it most. The media, in their attempt to dig deeper into the story, quickly shifted focus from the donation itself to Michael's motivations. In interviews with friends, family, and those close to him, it became clear that his generosity was driven by more than just a sense of duty or obligation. Michael's connection to the hospital, to Brooklyn, was deeply personal. It wasn't just about the money, it was about making sure others had the same opportunities he had. As the renovations continued, Michael's act of kindness started to inspire others to give back in their own ways. His quiet, selfless donation became a model for how to make a difference without seeking recognition. The community began to see that even the smallest gesture could have a lasting impact. While the hospital itself received the bulk of the attention, the true gift that Michael had given was the ripple effect his donation created. People from all walks of life were inspired by his story. Those who had once felt powerless in the face of systemic challenges, whether it be in their healthcare, their schools, or their local government, suddenly began to believe that change was possible. Michael Jordan had done more than just save a hospital. He had shown that one individual, armed with the right intentions, could turn the tide and reshape the course of a community's future. As the hospital opened its doors to the public once again, there was a sense of accomplishment shared by everyone involved. The renovation had not only modernized the facility but also revitalized the spirits of the people who worked there and the families who depended on it. It was a victory not just for those who received care, but for those who provided it. Michael Jordan's influence reached beyond the walls of the hospital, though. The transformation of the facility became a part of the larger narrative of Brooklyn's resurgence. The neighborhood, long overshadowed by the specter of gentrification, began to see its potential through a new lens. Local businesses thrived, schools gained new resources, and families found themselves better supported by a system that once seemed to be on the brink of collapse. Michael's donation was more than just a financial lifeline, it had become a catalyst for change in an entire community. For Michael, however, the donation was never about the long-term effects on the neighborhood. He understood that it wasn't just the hospital that needed help, it was the people. The communities that often went unnoticed, the families who fought every day for a better life, deserved the same chances at success that anyone else had. His involvement with the hospital was just one way of giving back, but it was far from the only one. Michael had always been a man who believed in using his platform to make a difference, whether that was through his basketball career or his charitable efforts. As the years passed and Michael's legacy continued to grow, the story of the Brooklyn Hospital would always be one of the defining moments of his life. It wasn't a championship, a record-breaking achievement, or a headline-grabbing endorsement deal. It was a quiet, thoughtful act of kindness that showed the world the true heart of one of basketball's greatest players. Michael Jordan's legacy, built on the foundation of competition, greatness, and perseverance, was also defined by his ability to give back and make a difference when it mattered most. The hospital in Brooklyn, now fully renovated and thriving, stood as a testament to the power of one individual's ability to change the course of a community's future. Michael Jordan, far from the spotlight, had left behind a legacy that extended far beyond basketball. It was a legacy of generosity, compassion, and a reminder that sometimes the most significant victories happen off the court, in the quiet moments when you least expect them. The ripple effect of Michael Jordan's decision to anonymously fund the renovation of the Brooklyn Hospital spread far beyond the immediate neighborhood. While the hospital was undeniably the focal point of his generosity, the legacy of his actions began to take root in ways that were far more profound. The revitalization of the hospital served as a symbol of hope and renewal, not only for the people of Brooklyn but also for communities across the nation. It was a quiet act that spoke volumes about the power of giving, especially for someone who had already accomplished more than most could ever dream. For years, Michael Jordan had been a household name, celebrated for his unparalleled achievements on the basketball court. But despite his fame, his personal life remained largely private. The world knew Michael as the driven, sometimes enigmatic athlete who had transcended sports to become a global icon. Yet few knew the depth of his humility, his sense of duty, or the personal values that shaped his life. This donation, which would eventually be tied back to him, was just one example of how he lived those values every day. The community's response to the hospital's reopening was overwhelming. Local residents, who had once feared the loss of their only healthcare resource, now felt a sense of relief and pride. The hospital had always been there for them, even if it wasn't always at its best. Now, with the renovation, it had become a beacon of possibility. It wasn't just a place to go when someone was sick, it was a place where families could go to get the care they deserved, where doctors and nurses had the resources they needed to provide the highest level of care. In a neighborhood that had seen its fair share of hardships, the hospital's transformation was a sign that things could improve, that the community could thrive once more. In the months that followed, word of Michael's involvement spread. At first, it was little more than a rumor, with many in the community speculating about who could have made such a significant donation. The truth, when it finally emerged, surprised no one more than the staff at the hospital. They had heard of Michael's generosity before, particularly in regard to his other charitable efforts, but this donation, tied so deeply to his personal history, was unlike anything they could have expected. For Michael, though, the most important part of the story wasn't the attention that would eventually come his way, it was the difference he had made. He had always been a firm believer in the power of community. As a child growing up in Brooklyn, Michael had witnessed firsthand how neighborhoods, when supported, could flourish. His mother had instilled in him a deep sense of responsibility, and while his journey to greatness had often taken him far from home, the lessons he had learned there never left him. His success in basketball was a testament to his ability to push beyond boundaries, but his generosity was a reflection of his understanding of the greater picture. As the story of his donation spread, others began to look at their own communities and wonder if they could do something similar. Michael's quiet philanthropy had sparked a conversation about what it meant to give back, to invest in places that had shaped one's life. People from all walks of life, athletes, business owners, and everyday citizens, began to ask themselves what they could do to improve their own neighborhoods. It was a reminder that anyone, no matter their background, could make a difference. For the hospital staff, the donation wasn't just a financial boost, it was a validation of their work. They had always believed in the importance of what they were doing, but now, with modern facilities at their disposal, they could offer a higher level of care than ever before. Many of the nurses and doctors had spent decades working in a facility that was often underfunded and overcrowded. The renovation not only improved their working conditions but also reinforced the mission that had brought them to the hospital in the first place, to help people in need. With Michael's gift, the staff found themselves reinvigorated, knowing that they could now truly make a lasting impact on the lives of their patients. While Michael's gift was transformative, it was only the beginning of a broader shift in the way the community approached healthcare, education, and social responsibility. The example he had set inspired local organizations to look more closely at how they could help improve the lives of the people they served. The renovation of the hospital wasn't just about one man's donation, it was part of a larger movement to revitalize Brooklyn and other underserved communities across the country. In the months after the hospital reopened, Michael continued to stay out of the public eye. He was content with his decision to remain anonymous, understanding that the attention should remain focused on the people who had been most affected by the hospital's transformation. But for those who knew the truth, Michael's gesture was a reminder that greatness wasn't just about winning titles or accumulating wealth. It was about the quiet, behind-the-scenes actions that had the power to change the course of people's lives. The more the story of Michael's donation was told, the more people came to appreciate the kind of man he truly was. While his basketball career had been built on intense competition and a desire to be the best, his philanthropy was rooted in compassion and humility. He understood that the world didn't owe him anything, he had worked tirelessly for every achievement he had, and now, he wanted to give back. The hospital's renovation was just one example of how he used his success to make a difference. As the renovation was completed and the hospital became fully operational again, the community saw more than just a physical transformation. The building had been refurbished, but it was the people inside, the doctors, nurses, and patients, that truly represented the change. With the new resources available to them, the hospital became a place of healing in a deeper sense. The medical staff could now do their jobs with the tools they needed, and patients could walk through the doors knowing they would receive top-notch care. It was a reminder that when communities invest in each other, the results can be life-changing. The true legacy of Michael's donation wasn't just in the renovated walls of the hospital, though, it was in the change he had inspired. In the wake of his contribution, the people of Brooklyn were reminded that even in the toughest of times, there was always hope for a better future. The renovation had given the hospital a second life, but it had also given the community a renewed sense of possibility. Michael Jordan's influence on Brooklyn didn't end with the reopening of the hospital. His example encouraged others to look beyond themselves and think about the ways they could make a difference in their own communities. His generosity showed that greatness wasn't only measured by the number of championships you won or the accolades you received. It was about using your success to lift others up, to provide opportunities where none existed, and to leave a lasting impact that went far beyond personal gain. As time went on, the hospital continued to thrive, serving as a vital resource for the people of Brooklyn. But more importantly, it stood as a testament to what could happen when someone with the means to make a difference chose to act, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. Michael Jordan's legacy, defined by his unparalleled success on the basketball court, was now also defined by his quiet, meaningful contributions off of it. And for the people of Brooklyn, the hospital's transformation was a constant reminder of the power of one person to change the course of an entire community's future. The renovation of the Brooklyn Hospital not only revitalized the building, but it also breathed new life into the entire neighborhood. The impact of Michael Jordan's donation, though it had started quietly, soon became a focal point for both the residents of Brooklyn and those who had followed his career for years. Michael had long been known for his relentless pursuit of greatness on the basketball court, but this quiet, selfless act of philanthropy would reveal a side of him that few had seen before, one defined by humility, care for others, and a deep sense of responsibility to give back. What began as a small, almost private gesture had snowballed into something far greater than anyone could have imagined. As news spread about the hospital's transformation, more people began to take notice, not just of the facility's revival, but of the impact it had on the community. The hospital, once a forgotten relic, was now a shining example of what could be achieved when the right people cared enough to take action. Michael's donation wasn't just a financial gift, it was a message to the people of Brooklyn that they were worthy of investment and care. For those in the neighborhood who had watched the hospital slowly deteriorate, it was a welcome relief. The uncertainty of losing such an essential institution was a source of anxiety for many families, especially those who relied on it for routine care. But with the renovation came hope. The hospital, now equipped with the latest medical technologies and staffed by professionals who had been given the tools to succeed, was poised to make a real difference in the lives of those who depended on it. The impact was immediate. People no longer had to travel long distances for care, the services they needed were right in their own backyard. In the months that followed, the hospital became a place not just of healing but of inspiration. It stood as a testament to the power of community and the importance of supporting one another. And while the hospital's new facilities were undoubtedly impressive, the true heart of its transformation lay in the people, both the staff who had worked tirelessly for years and the patients who had walked through its doors, unsure of what the future would hold. Now, with the resources they needed, the hospital became more than just a medical facility, it became a source of pride and a symbol of the community's strength. Michael's decision to remain anonymous for so long added an extra layer of mystery to the donation. The more people learned about the details of his involvement, the more they realized that his motivations went beyond simple charity. Michael wasn't trying to make headlines or add another chapter to his already storied career. He wasn't seeking recognition or accolades. His motivation had been deeply personal, rooted in his own memories of growing up in Brooklyn and the values that his family had instilled in him. His visit to the hospital, long before the renovation project even began, spoke volumes about his connection to the place. For Michael, the hospital wasn't just a building, it was part of his story. It was where he had taken his first breath, where his journey began. That bond, formed decades ago, had never been forgotten. It was a quiet, almost unnoticed moment, but for Michael, it was significant. He wasn't a man who believed in grand gestures for the sake of fame. Instead, he wanted to make sure that the place where he had come into the world had the chance to thrive again. He wanted to give back in a way that was meaningful, something that would outlast his time in the spotlight. As the story of the donation slowly emerged, the people of Brooklyn were taken aback by Michael's quiet generosity. He had long been a source of inspiration to many because of his athletic prowess, but now they saw him in a different light. The Michael Jordan they had known was a fierce competitor, a man who demanded excellence from everyone around him. But this new side of him, the philanthropist who quietly worked to make a difference, became just as inspiring. He wasn't a superhero, he was a person, a man who cared deeply about the community that had shaped him. The success of the hospital's renovation also sparked a larger conversation about philanthropy and social responsibility. Michael's actions encouraged others to think about how they could give back, not just in financial terms, but through time, effort, and a willingness to invest in the future of their communities. It was a reminder that even the most successful individuals had an obligation to use their success to lift up others. Michael's example became a touchstone for many who had the means to help but hadn't yet figured out how to make the greatest impact. His decision to support the Brooklyn Hospital, without seeking recognition, demonstrated that real giving came from the heart, not the desire for applause. In the weeks after the hospital's grand reopening, the community felt a renewed sense of energy. People began to come together in ways they hadn't before, inspired by Michael's gift to remember that their collective strength was something worth celebrating. The hospital wasn't just a place for medical treatment, it had become a symbol of the power of community, of what could be achieved when people rallied behind a cause greater than themselves. For Michael, the act of giving back wasn't about seeing the tangible results immediately. He understood that change, real and lasting change, often takes time. The hospital's transformation wouldn't be measured by the number of people who walked through its doors in the first month or the first year. The impact of his donation, he knew, would be felt in the long run, in the lives that would be saved, the children who would be born in a state-of-the-art facility, the families who would experience care without fear of bankruptcy. It was about creating a foundation for the future, a place where people could rely on for years to come. As Michael reflected on the impact of his donation, he didn't see himself as a hero or a savior. He simply saw himself as a person who had the ability to make a difference, to use his success to create something meaningful. His basketball career had made him one of the most famous athletes in the world, but his true legacy was being built in moments like this one, in the quiet, behind-the-scenes work of making the world a better place. He had already achieved greatness in the game of basketball. But in that moment, helping the Brooklyn Hospital, he had achieved something far more significant. He had given people the opportunity to heal, to grow, and to thrive. The community that surrounded the hospital had been changed, not just by the renovation itself, but by the lessons it imparted. They had learned that their struggles mattered, that they were worthy of care, and that even in the toughest of times, change was possible. Michael Jordan's gift to Brooklyn had shown them that no matter where they came from or what they had been through, they had the power to shape their future. The hospital's reopening wasn't just a medical achievement, it was a victory for the entire community. And for Michael Jordan, the greatest basketball player the world had ever known, it was a reminder that the greatest achievements weren't always the ones that made the most noise, they were the ones that quietly changed lives. As the Brooklyn Hospital's renovation continued to have an undeniable impact, the wider narrative surrounding Michael Jordan's quiet donation began to take shape. This wasn't just about a man who had won 6 NBA championships, built a global brand, and become synonymous with excellence. The story had evolved into something much more profound, an illustration of how true greatness isn't always about what you do for yourself, but what you do for others. For Michael, the experience had been nothing like any of the high-profile moments in his career. There were no flashing lights, no fans chanting his name, no championship rings to be won. The quiet satisfaction he found in knowing the hospital was saved, the community was given new hope, and people were getting the care they needed, was unlike any victory he had achieved in basketball. It wasn't the type of moment that would fill up highlight reels or adorn magazine covers, but in his heart, Michael knew it was one of his most meaningful accomplishments. The transformation of the hospital itself became a powerful metaphor for Michael's own life journey. Like the hospital, Michael's career had started with a sense of uncertainty and struggle. He had been cut from his high school basketball team, faced numerous critics who doubted his ability, and yet, through sheer willpower, he rose to become the most dominant basketball player in history. Now, with the hospital's revival, Michael saw how resilience and determination could bring about change, even in the face of adversity. The hospital, once a crumbling symbol of neglect, was now a thriving beacon of hope, a testament to the power of second chances. And for Michael, that idea of redemption resonated deeply. His journey was never linear, but his ability to rise above challenges had been a constant theme in both his career and personal life. As Michael stepped further away from the limelight, his philanthropic efforts, like his donation to the Brooklyn Hospital, continued to unfold. He had always been someone who valued actions over words, and his decision to remain behind the scenes reflected that deeply ingrained principle. He didn't need to shout his accomplishments from the rooftops or revel in the accolades. The satisfaction came from knowing he had made a real difference. For someone who had spent decades under the intense glare of the media, the anonymity of his contribution to the hospital allowed him to reconnect with his true values without the trappings of fame. Yet, even in his desire to remain low-key, the world began to take notice of Michael's generosity. As word of the donation spread, so did the stories of other athletes, business leaders, and community members who were inspired by his actions. Many saw Michael's decision as an example of how wealth and success could be used to address systemic inequalities. It wasn't just about the money, it was about investing in people, in communities, and in creating a lasting impact. Michael had set a new bar for what it meant to be a role model, one that extended far beyond the basketball court. The story of the Brooklyn Hospital began to resonate with a wider audience. People across the country began to ask themselves, "How can I help?" And the answers weren't always about writing big checks. Michael's example showed that sometimes it was about starting small and thinking long-term. Giving back could take many forms, whether through time, resources, or support for initiatives that might not make the headlines but that had the potential to change lives. The impact of his quiet donation rippled outward, reminding others that they too could make a difference in their communities. As the hospital reopened, its revitalization symbolized not only the restoration of a physical building but the rejuvenation of the neighborhood's spirit. The doctors and nurses, equipped with the tools they needed to provide the best care, felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were able to treat their patients with the level of attention and technology that the community had long deserved but lacked. For them, the hospital's renovation wasn't just about infrastructure, it was about giving the people they served a fighting chance at a better, healthier life. The families that had once relied on the hospital for everything from routine checkups to emergency surgeries now had access to better resources. The hospital had always been a place of solace for those in need, but now, with a full renovation, it was a place of pride. As patients arrived, the physical surroundings may have been different, but the essence of the hospital remained the same. It was a place where people could find support, heal, and move forward. Michael Jordan's contribution had ensured that the hospital's future would be secure for generations. And in the same way that he had worked tirelessly to build his own legacy as a basketball player, his actions had contributed to building a legacy of community support and hope. As the years passed, the story of Michael's donation would live on, not just in the walls of the hospital, but in the lives of the people who would benefit from the care it provided. While Michael had remained out of the public eye throughout the entire process, there was something profound about how he allowed the story to unfold naturally. His involvement with the Brooklyn Hospital was never intended to be about him. It wasn't about putting his name on a building or creating a public relations campaign. The point of the donation was simple: the hospital was an integral part of his past, and it needed help to continue serving those who depended on it. That act of giving back, from one person to an entire community, was all Michael needed to know he had done the right thing. For the people of Brooklyn, the hospital's transformation was a reminder of what was possible when a community supported its own. It wasn't just about healthcare, it was about collective action, about believing that things could improve and working together to make that change happen. Michael's donation, though quietly executed, helped facilitate that shift in mindset. The hospital became a beacon of what could be achieved when resources were used wisely, and when people, no matter their status, understood their responsibility to the world around them. As the years went by, Michael's legacy continued to grow, not just as a basketball player, but as a philanthropist who understood the value of helping others, especially those who might not have the means to help themselves. His donation to the Brooklyn Hospital was a reflection of the principles that had driven his entire career. It wasn't enough to be the best. It wasn't enough to win championships. The real challenge, Michael understood, was to use his success for something greater than himself, to leave behind something that would endure long after he had walked away from the game. His legacy wasn't just in the victories he achieved or the iconic moments that were etched into history. It was in the quiet, everyday acts of generosity that changed lives and communities. The hospital, restored to its former glory, stood as a lasting reminder of Michael Jordan's belief in the power of giving back. Through this act, he had shown that sometimes the greatest victories come not from on-court triumphs, but from the simple act of making a meaningful difference in the lives of others. The renovation of the Brooklyn Hospital had become more than just a physical transformation. It was the manifestation of Michael Jordan's quiet belief in the power of community, the importance of giving back, and the idea that true greatness wasn't defined by championships or fame alone. As the community came to terms with the fact that it had been Michael's generosity that had saved the hospital, something much deeper began to unfold. It wasn't about a famous athlete doing a good deed, it was about a man who understood the real value of legacy and how to make a lasting impact. For Michael, the decision to stay out of the spotlight for this particular act of kindness was deliberate. He had spent years in the media's glare, his every move scrutinized, analyzed, and broadcast for the world to see. He had learned to navigate the pressures of fame early in his career, and by the time his basketball days were winding down, he had grown weary of the constant attention. This time, his act of giving wasn't about garnering praise or creating a spectacle. It was about something much more personal, reconnecting with his roots, paying tribute to the community that had shaped him, and ensuring that others would have the opportunities he had been fortunate enough to receive. As the community embraced the hospital's reopening, something profound began to take shape. The hospital had long been the heart of the neighborhood, but its decay had left many residents feeling abandoned. For years, families had relied on the hospital for care, but it had been neglected, underfunded, and outdated. Yet with the renovation came a renewed sense of pride, a sense of purpose that reverberated throughout the community. The hospital was no longer just a place to go when one was sick, it became a symbol of resilience, of what could happen when people came together to support something that truly mattered. The renovation not only transformed the hospital itself but also reignited the spirit of community that had been stifled by years of neglect. People who had once felt helpless in the face of bureaucratic indifference now saw that change was possible. The very idea that one individual, regardless of their status, could make a meaningful difference in the lives of many, gave the residents of Brooklyn a new sense of hope. They had witnessed firsthand the power of giving back, of using one's resources to improve the lives of others, and that was something that would stay with them long after the hospital reopened its doors. The doctors and nurses who had worked at the hospital for years also felt the impact of the renovation. Many had long been frustrated with the limitations of the outdated facility. They were trained professionals who wanted to give their patients the best care possible, but they had often been constrained by the hospital's aging infrastructure and lack of resources. With the new renovation, however, the medical staff found themselves with state-of-the-art equipment and upgraded facilities that enabled them to provide the best possible care to their patients. This transformation not only improved their ability to do their jobs but also boosted their morale. The hospital's new focus on quality care reinvigorated the entire staff and gave them a renewed sense of purpose. For the families who had long relied on the hospital, the renovation was a literal and symbolic shift. Many had walked through the hospital's doors, unsure of whether they would receive the care they needed, unsure of the future of the facility itself. But with the improvements came a sense of trust that they would receive not only top-notch medical treatment but also the dignity and respect they deserved. For many, the hospital's reopening was a turning point. It wasn't just about having access to better health care, it was about feeling seen, valued, and supported in a world that often overlooked the most vulnerable. As Michael's role in the donation became known, the community expressed its gratitude, but Michael's response was consistent: he wanted no recognition. His motives for giving back were never about elevating his own status or receiving accolades. The hospital had been a part of his own story, and in many ways, it had played a key role in shaping who he had become. It wasn't about heroism, it was about fulfilling a personal responsibility to give back to the place that had helped bring him into the world. But while Michael remained out of the public eye, his actions began to spark a broader conversation about philanthropy, social responsibility, and the role that public figures could play in addressing societal issues. People began to ask themselves, what can I do to make a difference in my own community? The idea that change could start with one person, that individuals could use their platform to improve the lives of others, resonated deeply. Michael's quiet donation had sparked a shift in how people viewed their own potential to contribute. As the hospital's reopening marked a new chapter in the community's story, the residents of Brooklyn began to look at their neighborhood through a new lens. The hospital was no longer a symbol of decay. It was now a living, breathing testament to what could be achieved when people cared enough to invest in the future. The community's relationship with the hospital had always been one of necessity, but now, with the renewed facilities, it became something much more, an integral part of the neighborhood's growth and resurgence. Beyond the hospital's walls, the impact of Michael's donation continued to reverberate. Local businesses, schools, and civic organizations found themselves energized by the hospital's revitalization. The message that had been sent, both directly and indirectly, was clear: when people invested in their community, the community flourished. Brooklyn had long been a neighborhood that had been written off, often neglected by those with the resources to make a difference. But Michael's quiet act of generosity had shown that even in the most challenging circumstances, positive change was possible. The renovation also became a point of reflection for those who had followed Michael's career for years. For many, his on-court success had always been the defining aspect of his legacy. He had built an empire on his basketball talents, but this quiet act of philanthropy showed that his legacy wasn't just built on titles and endorsements. It was built on a willingness to use his resources for the greater good. Michael had always been known for his competitive drive and unrelenting work ethic, but his decision to invest in the hospital illustrated another side of his character: his deep understanding of the importance of family, community, and legacy. As time went on, Michael's influence continued to shape the way people thought about their own roles in society. His actions made it clear that true success wasn't measured by what one achieved for oneself, but by what one contributed to the world around them. The transformation of the Brooklyn Hospital wasn't just a one-time gesture. It was part of a larger movement to rethink how individuals, especially those with the power to make a significant impact, could use their platforms for good. The hospital's reopening, though significant in itself, became a reminder of the importance of sustaining change. It wasn't enough to renovate the building. The real work came in maintaining the standards of care and continuing to invest in the community. Michael's donation had provided the foundation, but the ongoing work of ensuring the hospital remained a thriving, vital resource for the community was a shared responsibility. The hospital's success would depend on the people who continued to support it, the doctors and nurses who dedicated their lives to providing care, and the community members who continued to advocate for their needs. In the end, Michael Jordan's involvement with the Brooklyn Hospital became a defining chapter in his life, a chapter that wasn't written in the public eye but one that would continue to inspire those who heard the story. It wasn't just about his financial contribution, it was about the message he sent. His actions proved that even the most famous and accomplished individuals could use their influence to make a tangible difference. And in doing so, Michael reminded everyone that true greatness lies not in what you achieve, but in what you give back. As the Brooklyn Hospital continued to flourish, so did the ripple effect of Michael Jordan's quiet donation. His name, while not widely associated with the revitalized building, became symbolic of a shift in how people viewed the relationship between fame, wealth, and giving back. The impact of his generosity extended far beyond the walls of the hospital, and as time passed, the message he sent about the power of using one's success to help others began to resonate deeply with people across different walks of life. Brooklyn, for many years, had been a place of promise and struggle, defined by its history, culture, and the hard-working individuals who called it home. Yet, for those who lived there, it was also a place that had suffered from neglect. The hospital, a cornerstone of the neighborhood's healthcare infrastructure, had long been underfunded, overcrowded, and outdated. For many in the community, the hospital had been a last resort institution, a place to go when there was nowhere else. With Michael's donation, however, that narrative began to change. The hospital became more than just a building. It became a symbol of hope, progress, and the power of community. It wasn't just about having access to better healthcare, it was about regaining pride in the neighborhood, pride in a place that had once been overlooked but was now given new life. The hospital's transformation didn't just affect the people who worked there or the patients who walked through its doors. It had a ripple effect on the entire community. Local businesses began to see a shift as well. As the neighborhood's healthcare infrastructure improved, so did its overall economic prospects. People felt safer, healthier, and more hopeful about their future. New investments flowed into the area, and with that, new opportunities arose for residents who had long been left behind. It was as if Michael's act of kindness had unlocked a new chapter for Brooklyn, one in which people could dream of better futures, not just for themselves, but for their children and their children's children. For Michael, the decision to remain anonymous in his donation was one that aligned with his broader philosophy of leadership. His approach to philanthropy was rooted in a belief that actions spoke louder than words. Throughout his career, he had always been someone who let his work speak for itself. On the court, it was his relentless pursuit of excellence that made him a household name. Off the court, it was the same drive that motivated him to quietly support causes that mattered to him, causes that often went unnoticed by the public eye. His decision to help the hospital was a reflection of this belief. It wasn't about recognition or accolades. It was about doing what needed to be done to make a difference. But even in his desire for anonymity, the impact of Michael's actions could not be ignored. His donation created a conversation that went far beyond Brooklyn. People from all over the world were inspired by the story, and many began to reconsider their own approach to giving back. Michael had set a new standard for how public figures could use their platform for good. He demonstrated that wealth and fame could be leveraged not for personal gain, but for the collective well-being of communities in need. In the wake of the donation, several other high-profile individuals and organizations began to take a closer look at their own involvement in charitable causes. Michael's quiet gesture had proven that philanthropy didn't have to be a flashy, public affair. It didn't have to be about press conferences, big checks, or publicity stunts. It could be about quietly making a difference where it was needed most. His actions ignited a broader conversation about how resources, whether financial, intellectual, or social, could be used to address the systemic issues facing underserved communities. The hospital's reopening also served as a reminder that change often requires sustained effort. Michael's donation had provided the initial catalyst for the renovation, but it was the ongoing commitment of the community, the hospital staff, and local organizations that ensured the hospital would continue to thrive. The renovation was not just a one-time event, it was the beginning of a long-term investment in the well-being of the neighborhood. The hospital's success would depend on continued collaboration and dedication to the people it served. For the staff at the hospital, the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Many had worked there for decades, providing care in less than ideal conditions. They had long known the importance of the hospital to the community, but with the renovation, they were finally given the tools to deliver care at the highest level. This new chapter in the hospital's history reinvigorated the staff. They felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that the work they did would have a lasting impact on the lives of their patients. They could now provide better care, faster treatment, and more specialized services, all thanks to the donation that had breathed new life into the facility. For the patients who walked through the hospital's doors, the transformation was just as significant. The hospital had always been a place of refuge, but now it was a place of pride. People no longer had to worry about long waits or outdated equipment. They could trust that the care they received would be top-notch, and they could do so in a comfortable, modern environment. The hospital's new design emphasized patient comfort and well-being, creating a space where people could focus on healing rather than navigating a maze of outdated facilities. One of the most profound effects of the renovation was how it changed the way the community viewed itself. For years, Brooklyn had been written off by those on the outside as a place of struggle. But the renovation of the hospital signaled that things were changing. It was no longer a neighborhood defined solely by its challenges, but by its resilience. The hospital became a beacon of what was possible when people came together to support something larger than themselves. It wasn't just about healthcare, it was about the belief that, with the right resources, a community could heal and grow. Michael's donation had set that in motion, but it was the people of Brooklyn who carried it forward. The hospital's reopening wasn't just an event, it was a movement. It sparked conversations in other communities about the power of giving, of making investments where they were needed most. It encouraged people to think about how they could contribute, whether it was through financial support, volunteerism, or advocacy. Michael Jordan's act of kindness had shown that no matter how big or small, every act of giving had the potential to create a ripple effect that could change lives. For Michael, the quiet donation to the Brooklyn Hospital would never be as publicized as his 6 NBA championships, his brand, or his larger-than-life persona. But it would always be one of his proudest achievements. It was an act of pure altruism, driven by a desire to make a difference in a community that had played a foundational role in shaping who he had become. In a world often defined by competition, recognition, and self-interest, Michael Jordan's contribution to the Brooklyn Hospital was a reminder that sometimes, the most meaningful victories come not from what you achieve, but from what you give back. As the years passed, the Brooklyn Hospital continued to serve as a symbol of transformation and resilience. The building, once an aging structure on the verge of closure, had become a thriving medical center, serving as a lifeline for the local community. More than just a place of healing, the hospital had become a symbol of what could be accomplished when people, even in the most challenging circumstances, worked together for the common good. It wasn't just the physical structure that had been transformed, it was the spirit of the entire community. Michael Jordan's quiet involvement in the hospital's renovation had left an indelible mark, not just on the institution itself but on everyone who had witnessed it. His decision to remain anonymous had only added to the power of his gesture. He wasn't looking for praise or recognition. Instead, he had focused on making sure that the people who had given him so much during his early life would continue to have access to the care and resources they deserved. For Michael, this was the essence of true greatness. It wasn't about accolades or attention, it was about helping others, quietly and with purpose. Though Michael's role in the hospital's renovation was known to only a select few, the impact was felt far and wide. Word of his involvement reached not just the residents of Brooklyn but across the country, and soon the story of his donation became a testament to the power of philanthropy, humility, and community support. While the media had always focused on Michael's athletic accomplishments, this new chapter in his life revealed a different side of him, a man who had achieved success and fame but who never forgot where he came from and was always willing to give back. In the wake of Michael's contribution, the idea of community-focused philanthropy took on a new significance. People began to understand that real change didn't have to come from grand, sweeping gestures. Sometimes, it was the quiet, behind-the-scenes efforts that had the most lasting effect. Michael had shown the world that you didn't have to be in the spotlight to make a difference. Whether it was through a generous donation, volunteering your time, or simply being there for your community, every action had the potential to create a ripple effect that could transform lives. For the hospital staff, the transformation of their workplace had been life-changing. Doctors, nurses, and support staff who had long worked in conditions that made it difficult to provide the best care now had access to modern equipment and updated facilities that allowed them to deliver top-tier treatment. They no longer had to worry about making do with outdated technology or cramped, inefficient spaces. The renovation had given them the tools they needed to serve their patients with the highest level of care. It had also provided them with a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that their work was now supported by the community and by someone who truly understood the importance of their mission. The patients who walked through the hospital's doors could also feel the difference. For years, many had come to the hospital in search of answers, unsure if they would receive the care they needed. Now, with the newly renovated facility, they could trust that their health and well-being were in capable hands. The hospital had transformed from a place of uncertainty into a place of comfort and hope. People could receive care in a space that made them feel valued, not just as patients but as human beings deserving of the best treatment possible. In many ways, the hospital had become a reflection of the community itself. Once a place that many had written off, it had been given a second chance, a new life. Just as the hospital had been revived, so too had the spirit of Brooklyn. People began to see the neighborhood in a different light. It wasn't just a place defined by its struggles, it was a place that had shown incredible resilience and determination. The people of Brooklyn had rallied together to support the hospital, and in doing so, they had found new strength and pride in their community. As the hospital continued to thrive, Michael's involvement remained a quiet but powerful reminder of the importance of using one's resources to help others. The ripple effect of his generosity was still being felt throughout the community. The hospital had become a center of hope, not just for those who sought medical care but for everyone who had been touched by Michael's gift. The story of how one man had chosen to give back to the place that had shaped him resonated with people far beyond Brooklyn. It reminded them that true greatness wasn't about what you achieved for yourself, but about what you could do to make the world a better place for others. The impact of Michael's donation didn't stop at the hospital. It continued to inspire others to think about how they could give back to their own communities. The idea that one person, through their actions, could spark change and make a lasting impact became a powerful motivator for many. People began to see that giving back wasn't just for the wealthy or the famous, it was something anyone could do, regardless of their circumstances. Michael had shown that it wasn't about the size of the donation or the recognition that came with it, it was about the intention behind the act and the difference it could make. For Michael, the hospital's success was a reminder of how far he had come, not just as a basketball player, but as a person. His journey had been one of overcoming obstacles, both on and off the court. And while his career had defined much of who he was in the public eye, it was his actions off the court, his ability to give back and invest in others, that would ultimately define his legacy. Michael had never been one to seek out the spotlight, and his decision to help the hospital without fanfare was consistent with the way he had lived his life. As the years passed and the hospital continued to thrive, Michael's contribution became an integral part of his story. It wasn't the crowning achievement of his life, it wasn't the 6 championships or the iconic moments on the court that people remembered most. It was the quiet, unspoken acts of kindness that had the most lasting impact. Michael's decision to help the hospital wasn't just about saving a building, it was about saving a community, giving people the tools they needed to thrive, and offering a future filled with hope. When the hospital eventually celebrated its 10th anniversary of the renovation, the story of Michael's involvement was told not as a tale of a famous donor but as the story of a man who understood the true meaning of legacy. It was about more than just the act of giving, it was about what the giving created. And in the case of the Brooklyn Hospital, it created a thriving, hopeful community that would carry Michael's influence forward for generations to come. Michael Jordan's legacy had always been defined by his excellence in basketball. But it was these quiet, meaningful moments, like his gift to the hospital, that would define him as a man. He had built his career on the belief that the best way to succeed was through hard work, determination, and an unrelenting pursuit of excellence. But off the court, Michael had shown that the greatest victories were the ones that helped others rise, helped communities thrive, and helped individuals achieve the opportunities they deserved. This was Michael's true legacy, a legacy not of titles, but of lives changed for the better.